welcome. I'm Nick Wallace. I am the Head of Partnerships at ARC Curriculum Plus. I've worked on the English Mastery Programme since it launched back in ARC schools in 2014. And today we've got a webinar for you on shaking up Shakespeare. What is the English Mastery approach to teaching Shakespeare? How does it fit into curriculum design? And what are some of the techniques, the pedagogies that we think really support students to engage with, access and enjoy Shakespeare's plays. This is one of a part of a series of webinars we're running this week. We're calling Can't Beat 'em, Join 'em. So some of you may have joined Steph earlier on today speaking about metacognition. Some of you may have joined my colleague Caroline yesterday talking about P, Potezzel, Pretzel on analytical writing. We've also got a webinar tomorrow run by Michelin, and she'll be talking about, oh my goodness, it's fallen out of my head, but it's something very, very exciting. So do make sure you sign up and check your socials for that. So on to today's session. What we'll be doing here's the agenda. We'll be talking about the challenges of Shakespeare. What makes Shakespeare such a difficult playwright to study? What are the challenges that students face when they come to studying him? What role does comprehension have in allowing students to access the plays? What role does performance have in the dramas? They are plays, they're dramas, they're meant to be performed. How can we bring performance into securing students' understanding and engagement? What does a Shakespeare curriculum look like if we think about not just what happens in a classroom on a moment-to-moment basis, but on a term-to-term and year-to-year basis? What impact does that have on the way that we teach the way we approach the teaching of Shakespeare in the medium and long term? And then at the end, I'll be sharing information about an Education Endowment Foundation trial to which we're currently recruiting, and I'll give you more information about how you can join the program and access some funding to join the program. A little bit about about English Mastery, our background, who we are, where we're from. So English Mastery launched in ARC schools back in 2014. ARC schools are a large multi-academy trust based in England, with schools based in Hastings, Portsmouth, London and Birmingham, a large high-performing multi-academy trust. English Mastery is a subject improvement program with a focus on designing a curriculum with a professional development offer, an implementation infrastructure and an assessment framework. So everything a school can need to really develop their teachers' understanding of great English pedagogy and the supporting curriculum materials to make that live and breathe in their context. We're currently working with over 200 schools across the country, and the Education Endowment Foundation, a large research centre in England, they ran a research trial in 2019 and they're running a new trial. I'll share more information about the 2019 trial later on, and the current trial to which we're recruiting. What is English Mastery? As I say, we're a subject improve. Hello. We've got some international joiners today. Great to see you all. So thank you. So I just saw that in the chat. English Mastery is a subject improvement program. It's a professional development offer with curriculum materials to really support the implementation of a really robust, joyful, rigorous, knowledge-based English curriculum at Key Stage 3. In the program, we have our curriculum progression, our framework, also all the lesson resources with which to follow that curriculum sequence, the training, the professional development, the work with teachers to really help them to develop their own understanding of curriculum sequence, pedagogy, and assessment tools with which teachers can assess how well are my students graduating throughout the curriculum, what kind of progress are they making, and how can we further those, how can we close those knowledge gaps and allow them to make even more progress in the future. We work currently with schools across the UK in a very small smattering of international schools, and I can see we've got people calling in from all over the world. So it's a real pleasure to see you all today, and we're part of the ARC Schools family. We are a charity, we're a mission-led organisation, and our mission is to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of the background, the subject knowledge and the skills that allow them to succeed. So two things worth dwelling on there about empowering teachers, working with teachers to develop their love and their just the joy of English teaching. And regardless of backgrounds, we work with students from all backgrounds, particularly those in challenging circumstances too. So let's think about Shakespeare, the particular challenges of Shakespeare, and we're going to look at a passage from Romeo and Juliet just to get started. This is 4 lines from the prologue, So either take this as a starting point, or from your own experiences of teaching Shakespeare, what is it that Shakespeare that makes Shakespeare difficult for students? What is it about studying Shakespeare that students find really challenging? I'll give you 1 minute to pop some ideas and your experiences in the chat. Yep, so language. Wonder if you could be even more expansive than language. What is it about the language that students find challenging? So archaic vocabulary, yeah, fantastic. Probably archaic syntax as well, as part of Maxine's comment as well. I can't type very quickly, so I'll give you a few moments to get those fingers working. Yeah, so outdated reference for things that are obscure today, lost to the annals of time. Understanding the context, place, events seem to like it was written in the Victorian era seems to be a common misconception. Expectation that they translate every single word needs like a literal interpretation. The historical, the political background, high register of words. Yes, so some challenging vocabulary, some challenging figures of speech as well. So lots, even just in 45 seconds, come up with a huge amount of challenges that students face there. Here are some more which we also find as well. Yeah, it's also the challenge of actually reading drama. What does it mean to read drama versus reading prose, versus reading poetry, versus reading non-fiction forms as well? It's a particular discipline, isn't it? So here are some which we think the archaic language, the vocabulary, the use of wordplay. There's so much punning taking place. What's meant to be funny, what's meant to be literal, what's meant to be exaggeration, at hyperbole. The relentless figurative language. It's like can't just say something literally. Everything has to be in these layers of meaning. Makes it hard to figure out what is literally happening here. The character roles and expectations are unfamiliar. So these high characters, these dukes, these archdukes, these princes, what are our expectations of these particular characters? Someone earlier said a meaning can be lost as when we're reading it as a play rather than performance. Some plays have boring bits. The bit that springs to mind for me is the start of The Tempest, where Prospero tells his life story to Miranda, and Miranda starts falling asleep because it's so dull. Unfamiliar allusions to Greek, Latin literature, and even contemporary events in the Elizabethan Jacobean era. Some of the plots are deliberately confusing, especially the comedies. We're meant to be confusing and conflating the characters. Some plays are historical fiction. I think that someone mentioned something similar in the chat about the current political context and also the historical context. The plays are sometimes set at different time to which they were written, so that can be difficult. Settings are unfamiliar. The use of epithets, sobriquets. Who are we talking about? So reading that from the screen there, as I'm aware, some people might be listening on their phone. They might have great screens. That's why I'm reading from that there. So huge amount of challenges that students face. And to flip that, there are some things that make the teaching of Shakespeare challenging too, right? So as a teacher, we have to circumnavigate all of those challenges that students are facing, and there's also another kind of set of obstacles that we need to overcome. Teachers' own subject knowledge, my own subject knowledge wasn't great when I was teaching Shakespeare. It took me a long time to familiarize myself with the plays, with all of that context as well. Some people might not have studied it at university. Some people may not have a literature degree or an English literature degree. So actually the subject knowledge of teachers can sometimes be patchy. Working out how do we get through the whole play, or how do we make some sensible cuts, particularly in England when we're teaching at GCSE. The expectation is students read the whole play. They know everything from Act 1 Scene 1 to Act 5 Scene 5. And anything could come up. So how do we actually teach that whole play, or how do we excise bits in a sensible way? Although we can say that Shakespeare, more than anything else, he understands the human condition, what motivates humanity. That's what makes his plays timeless. But actually, how do we invite students to relate to those themes that are cropping up in the plays? The balancing of the drama, the dramatic reading, and how do we actually practically get through that in a class? We've got 30 students, it's hot, Tuesday afternoon when they're looking at the sports field or they're looking at doing something else? How do we capture students' attention and imaginations with that in the classroom too? And look, that's just a few things that my colleagues kind of come up with off the top of their head. I'm sure you've got plenty more. So we've kind of unpicked there. Shakespeare can be an intimidating writer to study. There's no two ways about it. So how exactly in classrooms, when we work with students, how can we break down those challenges and make it more accessible, more engaging for students? And in English Mastery, we really value comprehension as that gateway into Shakespeare, but also any text that students encounter. I don't know if this speaks to your experiences. I don't know if perhaps in the summary examinations you may have seen some students write something a little bit too close to this for your liking. Students' analysis sometimes looks a bit like this. The article tells me that horse racing is dangerous. I know that it's dangerous because it's dangerous. And we see that cyclical kind of logic that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really come to terms, get to grips with what's actually taking place. Before students can analyze, before they can really dive deep into writer's meaning, into themes, into arcs, all of those rich themes that students should be picking at, they need to comprehend what's literally taking place. If they haven't got that comprehension, anything else that follows is an empire built on sand. It will crumble away. And this has been increasingly understood across the sector, particularly in England, really neatly captured in Ofsted's Curriculum Research Review, which was published last year. Explicitly teaching background knowledge is foundational to increasing pupils' reading competency. It's true across the board for reading English comprehension. That background knowledge is absolutely foundational, utterly critical. So how can we then secure comprehension? I've got a few different techniques that we use in English Mastery. I'm certainly not claiming that we've invented these, certainly not claiming any kind of ownership of these. These are things that we use in our program that we think are really successful. So the Whoosh, really heavily popularized by the Royal Shakespeare Society. I believe it was the University of Warwick a few years ago. It's a way to cover the whole plot really clearly and succinctly. It allows us to focus on story, what's happening, and the key characters involved, and it's also a really great way to introduce the performative element of Shakespeare. So then what is a Whoosh? Works best in the drama studio or in the classroom when you've pushed all the chairs and tables to one side. Invite students to stand in a circle, all facing the center, and the teacher narrates the events of the play with key characters and key events. As they introduce the characters and their key actions, the teacher invites the student into the center of the circle to act out, to mime out that event, and to even speak some key words of dialogue. After a particular scene or a little passage, when maybe you've got a dozen or 20 students involved in the center, the teacher resets the action and says whoosh, and students return to the back of the circle, and then we resume the next part of the story. So here's an example of a whoosh from our unit of work on Romeo and Juliet. And you can imagine, if you will, a classroom with students in a circle and the teacher, I'll play the teacher, calling in different students to come into the center here. Part one of Romeo and Juliet, the ancient grudge. Two members of the Capulet household, two students come into the center, are walking through Verona when they see two members of the Montague household walk by. Two more students enter the center. The Capulets begin making provocative gestures at the Montagues. They square up to each other and a scuffle breaks out. I'm sure you can imagine your class enacting that. More members of both households join the fray, and the city is filled with the sounds of swords swishing and striking each other. Before anyone gets hurt, the Prince of Verona enters. The prince is the ruler of the city, and his word is law. As soon as he enters, the fight stops. He tells everyone Any more fighting will be punished by death. The prince says, if ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. Whoosh! So hopefully you can imagine the ways in which you'd be drawing students into the centre, the ways in which they'd be acting out or acting up some of the elements of that narrative. And we can see that key character, the Prince of Verona, his word is law, that quotation, inviting the student to read that out, really illustrates, really brings alive the stakes, what's at play in the start of Romeo and Juliet. And I'm sure you can imagine how that would play out for the rest of the story, continuing on different scenes, different passages, different key lines, to allow students to really get at that early doors grasp of what's happening in the play. In English Mastery, we do this before we read any of the plays, one of the first lessons we do in a unit of work, so that students have that foundational understanding of what is happening in the plot. What is the story about? Who are those key players? Who are those key characters? But a whoosh is just one way to secure comprehension, right? As a teacher, when you're trying to think about students engaging with Shakespeare, constantly plan, constantly think about ways in which students can understand what's taking place in that scene. So perhaps you want to state what's happening before reading. Don't leave it up to chance. Don't some passages you don't want to leave it up for students to decipher what's happening. You might want to say, in this passage, this is what's going to happen. Let's read. Provide a glossary for tricky words or imagery. And I think someone in the chat earlier said they think they have to translate every single word. Well, perhaps you provide that glossary for them so that they're not trying to do that translation exercise. Read and reread passages to help entrench that understanding. Use a modern translation alongside the text. Provide that to students so that they don't have to, so you can manage cognitive load, right, where students are paying attention. You can also frame comprehension in the question. You can offer that breadcrumb, that bread trail in the questions that you provide to students. And sometimes comprehension, mere comprehension, could be the very goal of the lesson, right? Instead of striving towards this rich analytical essay at the end of a lesson, for some passages, just understanding what on earth has just happened could be the very goal of the lesson. So what I want to do is let's look at what that looks like in an English mastery set of resources on Romeo and Juliet. This is from Romeo and Juliet's first meeting. Probably tells you how corrupted my head is. I now think of this in the Baz Luhrmann production. This is in at the ball, and there's the fishes in the fish tank, and Claire Danes is wearing the wings, and Leonardo DiCaprio is wearing whatever he's wearing. So this is the passage from there. I'll give you just a second to read through that, just to familiarize yourself with it. I'm not going to be testing you on it, so don't worry, but just to familiarize yourself with that passage. So how are some ways that so I've just given you a list of ways in which you can help students to comprehend the passage or comprehend Shakespeare, give you some tactics. Here's how those tactics play out in an English mastery lesson. So we'll pre-read it, we'll provide that context to students ahead of reading. In the passage you've just skimmed through, there's a lot of figurative language about pilgrims, about how they visit these shrines, and the kinds of actions, activities that pilgrims would undertake, and all the different imagery and symbolism that is related to pilgrimage. So palm trees as an example there, and shrines as well. So we'll provide that context for students, because some of them may not be familiar with it. Some of them will be, but some of them may not be. In this passage, we'll also give a literal translation. So we're going to remove the archaic syntax, some of the archaic language, and the archaic vocabulary, and we're going to present that to you in a more contemporary prose edition, so that you can really understand the nature of the conversation between these two characters. And hopefully you can see that illustrated there in that resource. And when I said you can present the comprehension answer in the question, this is what we mean by that. In this question, we ask students to identify all the times that Romeo talks about lips or kissing. One way you could do it is to say, what kind of imagery does Romeo use in his courtship? And that is dependent on students being able to unpick all those references to lips kissing. Or you can flip it and say, Romeo uses lots of phrases about lips and kissing. Can you find them for us? So it's a different way of approaching the same challenge. For your students who are maybe a bit older or more confident, you may wish to just say, what kind of language, what kind of imagery does Romeo use in his courtship of Juliet? But if you want to support students with that comprehension, you can phrase it in that way. And similarly with Juliet, identify all the times that Juliet talks about hands or praying. So you're presenting the answer in the question to support comprehension. And you might want to taper that, scaffold that away as students are more confident in Shakespeare, or maybe even within a term or across a number of years. But there are some ways in which you can support that comprehension in your questioning. So to round off, we've spoken about the challenges. To round off this little section on the role of comprehension, don't underestimate the importance of securing comprehension when reading Shakespeare. Comprehension precedes analysis. Before you get into those rich, deep explorations of analysis, you have to have that comprehension. Background knowledge is a key component of comprehension. There's a large body of evidence to support that. A whoosh, for those of you who haven't used one before, is a fantastic way to introduce plot, characters, and the performative elements of Shakespeare, and use a range of tools. Use every trick at your disposal to support a student's comprehension. And in the English Mastery Programme, I've already shown you some of the ways in which we do that, but that's within one single lesson. Across the whole unit of work in Romeo and Juliet in the English Mastery Programme, you'll find that comprehension running all the way through. Loads of lesson resources, teacher guidance, student-facing support documents too, to really facilitate that comprehension and to really unlock that engagement too. So we've spoken about the importance of comprehension. Let's think now about the role of performance and genre. Pardon me, the colleague joining from France, in my very East London pronunciation of genre. I won't do my affected accent there. So important to remember, performance and genre. Shakespeare wrote plays. They're there to be performed. They're there to be put on the stage. I'll speak to my experience. I found it really challenging when I was teaching to know how and when to bring drama into the classroom. When should I turn this from like a reading lesson into a performance lesson? How and when should I get students up on their feet? When should I book out the drama studio and do part of my lessons? And I found it really difficult to strike that balance between the English study and the dramatic study as well. In English Mastery, one steer, it's a steer, it's not a rule, it's a rule of thumb as opposed to anything else, is when genre manifests, when there's great examples of the genre of the play at work, that can be a really good way to, that's going to be a really good kind of signpost of an opportunity to bring performance into the classroom. So we're looking at A Midsummer Night's Dream here, an early comedy by Shakespeare. For those of you who I'm going to twist myself in knots here, but a key part of the play A Midsummer Night's Dream is a comedy. We see a confusion between two pairs of lovers. So we've got a pair of lovers, and a love potion causes everyone to fall in love with everyone else. It causes much hilarity, much conflict, and everyone has a miserable time, and it's hilarious for the audience. One activity we use, and I think we have coined this because it's a silly name, is insult bogey tennis. Insult bogey tennis. So that's from an early 2000s TV show, Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, and they would play a game where they would they'd say the word bogeys and they'd say it louder than anyone else. So who could shout it the loudest in a public space. Without if they got too embarrassed. So that's where that's the bogey bit. And tennis, because it goes back and forth between the characters, but also students too. If anyone remembers Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, please do say in the chat, because otherwise I feel like that's a bit of cultural capital that might be that's an audience of one. I hope it isn't. Classic. There we go. Thank goodness. There we go. There we go. You can see me going red there. It's not just the East London heat. So insult bogey tennis. There we go. So there's only one set of this insult bogey tennis. You can see the tennis ball there. So what does that look like in the classroom, right? Students take it in turn to use the insults from the play to insult each other in character as Hermia and Helena. So that there's that to and fro, to and fro, to and fro. And they escalate the performance at each stage. So they do the first one where they're just reading the phrases, you canker blossom, you maypole, you canker blossom, you maypole. After they've familiarized themselves with the language, we then add in another layer. And this is where we can bring in facial expressions as well. So they use the same words, the same insults, but now students are bringing in their facial expressions to really up the ante. In the third round, we can also add in gestures, hand gestures as well. And in the Grand Slam, you put it all together. So your voice, your face expressions, your gestures, to really demonstrate how the fight escalates. This passage here is one of the highest moments of comedy in the play. These two women who are the best of friends have fallen out over some boys. How ridiculous. And they are really going toe to toe with each other, really insulting each other in the grossest possible terms. And it's farce, right? It's an element of farce. For an audience, it's a moment of high enjoyment because these two best friends are being are acting so outrageously to each other. So genre is playing a key role in the moment in the play, and that is a great signal that this is a moment to draw on a dramatic pedagogies to really make that come to life in the classroom. Another key sign, that's one way. Another area is stage directions. Important to add the caveat that we know that Shakespeare wrote very few, if any, stage directions. They do remain a key part of studying a play. They can be useful to support understanding, performance, and engagement. And if there will be 5 points to anyone who can say why that particular image has been selected to illustrate the principle of stage directions. And but I will continue speaking anyway while we go on. So an example again from our Romeo and Juliet unit of work. We explore the deadly feud between the Montagues and Capulets. This is the moment right at that kind of midpoint of the play where there's the deadly battle between the Montagues and the Capulets in the centre of Verona. So before we read the passage with the dialogue, we extract the stage. It was Helen. Yes, it was. We'll go over it in a second. Yeah. So we scan through the resource, and we get students to identify all of the stage directions. And when we extract that, we can see the stage directions from this passage: enter Mercutio, Page, Benvolio; enter Tybalt, Petruchio, and others; enter Romeo. Draws, they fight. Romeo steps between them. Tybalt thrusts Mercutio. Tybalt flies. Exit, exit, exit. They fight. Tybalt dies. Exit Romeo. So even before we read that passage, we can see the role that stage directions are having with this particular scene. It's a really great way to secure comprehension. But this, again, as the midpoint of the play, is a moment of high peril, of high danger. And from this moment, Romeo's fate unravels. The moment that Tybalt dies, that's the moment that Romeo has to flee Verona, and all of the tragic events that succeed this event are they all come back to this moment in the play. So it's a high moment of that genre, the tragic genre at play here. In our lesson, we invite students to pick 6 of those key stage directions and produce a freeze frame, so just a frozen representation of what's happening in the play. And the students play a different character, Tybalt, Mercutio, Romeo, or the director, for those key stage directions. We also invite students, in addition to actually staging that in a freeze frame, we also ask students to think, what would this character be thinking or feeling or saying at this particular moment? So the genre is really coming to life, really manifest in that moment. a great way to think about how can I bring in a dramatic techniques from drama teaching into the classroom to secure understanding and to also really further students' understanding of the mechanics of the play, the language, the structure of the play here as well. So to summarize that passage on drama performance, bringing the play to life, what actors and drama teachers would say, getting the play on its feet, is a great way to secure understanding and engagement. Passages which elicit the genre make really good selections for performance work. And also when you see some interesting or a good sequence of stage directions, that can also be used to contribute to understanding and enjoyment, right? Those drama lessons, they really do stick in students' minds. Many teachers feel really a real lack of confidence. It can be quite daunting to bring some of those dramatic teaching techniques into the English classroom. And that's where in English Mastery, our training, our development offer really comes into play. There's a huge complementary set of professional development in English Mastery that allows teachers to build their confidence, their understanding of those different teaching techniques. So for all of our units of work, we present co-planning guidance so that your department, your team, your colleagues can come together and really map out as a team how we're going to make this lesson work. How can we bring the drama into this particular lesson? We've also got an anytime access learning platform. Our learning platform, My Mastery, contains loads of great videos of teachers, of practicing teachers, talking through how they'd approach that particular lesson, the different things that they tried, and what worked in their particular context, and ways that you can make it work as well. Anytime access on our learning platform. And we also have live training. We have our national conference where we have the chance to again practice that as a community. In our national conference in February, we were absolutely thrilled to invite colleagues from the National Theatre to run a workshop on how to bring drama into the classroom as well. So that's part of the partnership with English Mastery, access to some really high quality training related to what you're actually teaching as well. So a really exciting part of English Mastery. To take us on the final step of Shakespeare, I want to talk. It would be remiss of me not to talk about curriculum. English Mastery being a curriculum, a subject improvement program with curriculum plays such a key role. So what does that Shakespeare curriculum look like in English Mastery? What we have, what I'm showing, flashing up on screen here, is a version of our curriculum map. These are the texts in our literature and our language curricula, and we can see the role that knowledge is playing across key stage 3, so ages 11 to 14 in England. As a knowledge-rich curriculum, we're really explicit about the key concepts, ideas, themes, disciplinary knowledge that students should be encountering and grappling with at any point in the curriculum. And that's true for all parts, and it's also true for Shakespeare. So we tend to study Shakespeare in that spring term, and you may be familiar with like the concept of a spiral curriculum, where you revisit ideas, you build on it, so that spiral expands year after year after year, so students have a great platform. What does that look like in the Shakespeare curriculum English Mastery? In year 7, we study A Midsummer Night's Dream, and some of that key knowledge are the conventions of comedy, family conflict. So we see Aegeus and Hermia have a huge conflict at the start. That's the inciting incident, and the supernatural, the love potion, and Puck and Oberon and Titania. All of those concepts are really, really important for Midsummer Night's Dream, but they also come into play The Tempest. We also see The Tempest being a tragicomedy, so it's really helpful for students to know what comedy is. We see a lot of family conflict between Prospero and Miranda, so that father and daughter conflict again comes into play. It's a great foundation again. And we also see elements of the supernatural with Ariel and parts of Caliban's character in The Tempest. So that spiral, that foundation from year 7 is being built upon in year 8. We also introduce the nature of Italian city-states, why you'd be vying for power, what is an usurping ruler, why would someone want to be the Duke of Milan, right? What exactly is Prospero and Antonio in that conflict. And again, that knowledge spirals out again into Romeo and Juliet. So all of that knowledge from year 7, all of that knowledge from year 8 is foundational for comprehension of Romeo and Juliet, where we also see two families fighting for an Italian city-state. We see usurping rulers and Montagues and the Capulets vying to be king. We see family conflicts come into play with Capulet and Juliet. We also see the supernatural at work with the living draft, or the draft of living death that Juliet plans to take towards the end of the play. And we can also build on the conventions of comedy being in opposition to those of tragedy. There's like almost inverted, and we see those Italian city-states. And in the English sector, that really supports their further study at GCSE at Key Stage 4, right? So regardless of the plays that you study at literature, Macbeth, Merchant of Venice, Much Ado, Julius Caesar, all of that knowledge is so powerful for students to be familiar with as they embark upon their study at GCSE as well. So when we think about a Shakespeare curriculum, it's not just how does this work in the moment, but how is this supporting my students to access Shakespeare even easier, with even greater depth in later terms, in later years as well. And that medium long-term planning is really important for subject leaders to undertake. So do consider Shakespeare as part of your entire English curriculum. We'll be thinking about how Key Stage 3 supports you, Key Stage 4 GCSE, but also what platform is that offering students who are going on to study at A level and university and beyond. The traits, the themes, the ideas in Shakespeare's plays are timeless works of literature. So all of that key knowledge that I've just described in Shakespeare, the family conflict, the supernatural, the usurping rulers vying for power, they're key themes in Shakespeare, but they're key themes in literature. So whatever your literature course looks like, Shakespeare can offer you, it can do a lot of groundwork for your students, regardless of the other texts they're studying, whether it's Animal Farm, whether it's Jekyll and Hyde, whether it's An Inspector Calls. A lot of the knowledge that your students are developing in Shakespeare is also going to unlock so much stuff for them later on in their wider studies too. So revisit those themes elsewhere in your curriculum, create that virtuous cycle, that spiral curriculum where those themes, those ideas, those character traits, those personalities, those arcs, those narratives, those character tropes, whatever they might be, revisit them elsewhere in your curriculum, because it doesn't just support that future learning, but it also helps to re-secure and reinvigorate the Shakespeare study as well. So that wraps up the Shaking Up Shakespeare content. We've spoken about the challenges, what makes it so difficult, hopefully some useful reflections there, give you some ideas around what your students may be facing, the role of comprehension, securing that at every possible juncture, using every tool in your disposal to support students' comprehension. The use of performance, genre, helping that to really manifest genre, but also stage directions can be another great way to bring that into the English classroom, and to think how to think more long-term about developing students' knowledge of Shakespeare and enjoyment of Shakespeare in the longer term. And Helen was absolutely right. The image of the bear was from A Winter's Tale, where it's one of Shakespeare's most famous stage directions, which is exit pursued by a bear. So yeah, it's one of those myths. What was actually happening on stage at that particular moment? Who was the bear? Literal, or was it a bit of a farce? So I'm now going to take a moment to talk to you a bit more about the English Mastery Education Endowment Foundation EEF trial we're currently recruiting to, and how you and your school can get involved. I've already spoken about what the nature of English Mastery. We're a subject improvement program that includes not just continual professional development for your whole team, but also assessment materials, curriculum progression framework to support your teachers, your colleagues in the implementation of that Key Stage 3 English curriculum. To talk about impact, what impact does English Mastery have? When we launched the pilots of English Mastery back in 2014, an early evaluation found that students following English Mastery made 4 months additional progress than matched peers, right? So similar students from similar backgrounds, English mastery pilot students made 4 months additional progress. And from that pilot study, the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF, commissioned an evaluation into the program in 2019. Unfortunately, because of COVID and the disruption to schooling, we weren't able to get that final evaluation report where we say these are the months progress that English mastery is made by the EEF on a larger scale. But the EEF and the independent evaluators took out a huge amount of interviews with teachers delivering the program, and it was found to have a really powerful impact on their practice and on their students. So these statistics are from an independent evaluation, and it's really important to highlight that these are really compelling numbers for an independent evaluation. This isn't like on TV when you see 9 out of 10 dogs prefer Bonio, where it's a very small sample, very select sample. This is an independent evaluation, and these are very, very compelling statistics. 74% of teachers said English mastery improved students' grammar, 63% it improved their reading skills, 68% of teachers said it improved their writing skills, and 75% of teachers said English mastery improved their overall progress. And here's what they said about how we did that. So the key words, the vocabulary that English mastery builds upon: corrupt, naive, malicious. We've seen students retain that knowledge from year 7, which has been amazing. You can see the impact of all that retrieval into leaving. It's been really impressive. In addition, teachers said that 89% of teachers said that the literary heritage strand was quite or very effective, really high benchmark. 73% of teachers thought that our writing, our language curriculum was quite or very effective. And here's an example of what a teacher says about our grammar program. My subject knowledge with grammar and how we teach grammar has improved hugely. Speaking to other teachers in my team, they agree with that. The subject knowledge to do with the teaching of grammar, we've all improved 100%. That's a key part of our approach to English teaching, is the explicit teaching of language, of grammar. 81% of teachers would recommend the program to another school, and again, that's a really high figure. Really proud to kind of to feature so highly in teachers' regard. And 84% were satisfied with the training and support. So I spoke about the professional development that's available to teachers. 84% satisfied with the training and support. And this is what a teacher said about that, the nature of that support. The English mastery team gave really excellent feedback and get down to the nitty-gritty of what our school's problems are and how to iron them out. It's brilliant, actually. And that, I hope, speaks to the mission of the organisation of empowering teachers to really support them to teach even better subject lessons. And it's a partnership with schools where we really want to understand the challenges that your context is facing. And one final statistic, which I'm particularly proud of, particularly in the workload challenges that I know that schools are facing at the moment. 80% of teachers said that English mastery reduced their planning and marking workload, which I think is really a really significant statistic there. It isn't to say that teachers don't plan and mark with English mastery, far from it, but it changes the nature of what that activity looks like. So what we're now able to do is think about how we deliver the curriculum. That's something that is empowering for teachers, to not think about the nitty-gritty of a PowerPoint. We're actually able to think about how we deliver that content, how we deliver that curriculum. The ability to think about it as a teacher is liberating and a far better use of a teacher's time. So that's quotation from a teacher who took part in the trial in 2019, narrating how liberating the program was for them and their team. So I hope throughout this afternoon you've seen the kind of all the ways in which we support teachers, our approaches to Shakespeare literature, but not just here's some stuff. It's also the partnership which we have with schools and with teachers and with students. So we're currently recruiting to a new randomized control trial of English mastery. We're working in partnership with the Education Endowment Foundation, they're the funders, and Sheffield Hallam University, who are the independent evaluators as well. The trial is going to assess the impact of English mastery on 2023's Year 7 cohort. It's a 2-year trial, and it will follow them throughout their Year 7 next year and the Year 8 in the following year as well. A randomized controlled trial, it places schools into 2 groups. If you want to take part in the trial, if you want to join the trial, you're volunteering to be part of the randomization process. It places schools into 2 groups, the treatment group and the control group. I'll talk through what that looks like now. So once your school has applied for the trial, you're either assigned to the control group or the treatment group. If you're in the control group, you continue with your English curriculum as usual. You can do anything you want. You can adopt something new. You can continue with your existing provision. You can go and do something else. If you're part of a trust and they've got a new curriculum coming in, you can do whatever you want. The only rule is you can't work with English mastery for the next 2 years. Your school will submit data to the evaluators throughout the 2-year trial, but it's data that you'll be collecting anyway, and there'll be some other evaluation activity like surveys, questionnaires, interviews, things like that. And for that, you get paid. Your school gets paid £1,250 to spend on whatever your school wants. So you get paid for taking part in the trial as a thank you for participating in that evaluation activity. If you're in the treatment group, the English mastery group, you get full access to the English mastery curriculum and support, and all the in-person support as well, school visits, remote development sessions, in-person training as well. You will implement English mastery with your Year 7s in September and Year 8 as they roll out into 24-25. But you get access to everything in Key Stage 3, so you can do as much or as little as you want, but you must do English mastery with your Year 7s in September, and then Year 8s as they graduate into Year 8 the following year. And your school there, you need some skin in the game, right? You need to have some investment, but the EEF are heavily subsidising the programme there. It's only £900 per academic year for all of our curriculum materials and school support and teacher development as well. To be eligible, you must be an English state school. You must be non-selective. You must have a Year 7 cohort in 2023 and a Year 8 cohort in 2024. You can't have delivered English mastery in the past, and we're sorry to say that special schools are ineligible for the research trial. And what I'm going to do now is, if you would like to book a call with our team to learn about the English mastery trial, I have posted a link in the chat. All you have to do is click that link and you'll be able to pick a time that suits you. In the meantime, I will also allow you can sign up for more information by scanning the QR code. One thing I will say is that the next deadline for submissions is this Friday. So if you want to join the trial and be in the next set of randomization, you need to have submitted your application by this Friday. So you do that, and that you do need to act fast. You'll find the information there on our website and the EEF website too. Thank you, Lewis, for posting that link as well. I wonder if that was intentional or if that's for your other colleagues to join as well. But yeah, that's it. That should hopefully take you through to the same link as well. No, it's quite all right. Thank you. Spread it far and wide. Send it to all of your connections. If you've got any questions about what I've gone through today, so more than happy to talk about Shakespeare, more than happy to talk about our approaches to Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, Tempest, Midsummer Night's Dream, Insult, Bogey, Tennis, anything that you've heard today, more than happy to field your questions. And if you've got any questions about the trial as well, now is a great time to speak to them as well. Absolute pleasure, Kieran. Thank you for the practical tips of embedding drama into comprehension, the slide on stage directions and quizzing students how a character would feel in role. Yeah, we use think, feel and say quite a lot. That's a really nice way to expose what can be a conflict between how a character is acting and what's happening in that inner turmoil as well. So think, feel and say can be quite an interesting kind of toolkit as well. You're more than welcome, Lewis. Pleasure. And who was my East London friend as well? Was that was Maxine as well? Yeah. So good to see some colleagues as well from across the way. And I think I recognise some of the names from the early webinars as well. So it's really genuinely warms the cockles of my little heart to see people joining across the week, and I hope you're taking advantage of the sessions we've got on offer, and I hope it's a great offer to your department for professional development at this time of year. Yeah, so and Paul, I hope I've made it really clear earlier that the Whoosh was certainly not our idea. Really coming across a number of schools, a Whoosh is a brilliant way to start a play. So yeah, great to hear that that's something which you find works too. So what will happen next is we'll probably send you a little follow-up over the next couple of days, just inviting you to book a call with our team to join the trial or to join the program, and we'll be in touch next week with hopefully the recording of today's session. And if you've got any questions in the meantime, the email address to contact is partnerships@arccurriculumplus.org.uk. You're very welcome, Shilpa. Great to have you here, and thank you to those colleagues joining from France, and from the Middle East as well. Real pleasure to have you on.